You will have to be our final word on this. Thank you very much for calling in this morning. Joe Schatz, thank you for helping our viewers better understand the estate tax and capital gains tax. That does it for today's Washington Journal. Now, live coverage of the House.
The Honorable Robert J. Dole to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
The prayer today will be offered by our chaplain, Father Conroy.
Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, we give you thanks for giving us another day. We ask today that you bless the members of the people's house to be the best and most faithful servants of the people they serve. May they be filled with gratitude at the opportunity they have to serve in this place. We thank you for the abilities they have been given to do their work, to contribute to the common good. May they use their talents as good stewards of your many gifts, and thereby be true servants of justice and partners in peace. As this second session of the 112th Congress draws near its end, and pressing legislative business once again weighs heavily on this Hill and throughout our land, withhold not your spirit of wisdom and truth from this assembly. Give each member clarity of thought and purity of motive so that they may render their service as their best selves. May all that is done this day in this people's house be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance today will be led by the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Fleischman.
Please join me in pledging allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain up to 5 requests for 1-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimously to extend the rest of the House 1 minute.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in remembrance of Caleb Logan Cook. Caleb was born January 22, 1997, and passed away Saturday, December 1, 2012, at the age of 15. Caleb was a blessing to his parents and entire family from the day God placed him on this earth. Though life was often a struggle for Caleb, he met every challenge head-on and always with a thoughtful and caring disposition. He was an accomplished Boy Scout, earned his black belt in Taekwondo, and was recognized for having the highest GPA in his freshman class. In addition to all of his high school and extracurricular accomplishments, Caleb was engaged politically and always ready to discuss the day's news. A civically active young man, he was truly a shining example of our youth. Most of all, Caleb was a good friend to my son Jeffrey, a delightful son to his parents, a loving sibling to his sister and brothers, a blessing to his entire family. Caleb will be missed by all and always remembered. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Ohio seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I request permission to address the House on unanimous consent and by consent.
Without objection, the gentleman from Ohio is recognized for 1 minute.
Nearly 50 million Americans, over 10 million children live in poverty. 46 million Americans on food stamps. According to the Census Bureau, without Social Security, over 50% of people 65 and older would live and die in poverty. Why do we accept poverty? Why do we accept massive unemployment? Over 20 million Americans are without work. You cannot escape poverty without a job. Americans want jobs, not unemployment checks. If you don't have a source of income, you can't own a home. The middle class is disappearing. An unfair tax system is causing wealth to accelerate upwards, which is why I oppose the Bush tax cuts. But more tax increases and no massive jobs program are a prescription for disaster. We need more taxpayers, not more tax increases. You can't rebuild America by retaxing America. America. Poverty and joblessness constitute a national emergency. The private sector is not creating sufficient jobs. Congress has a constitutional obligation and power to coin or create money. We can use our power to put millions back to work rebuilding our infrastructure. H.R. 2990, the National Employment Emergency Act, can accomplish this. It's our choice. Increase taxes, cut spending, put the economy in a stall, or put millions back to work.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Ohio seek recognition?
To address for 1 minute and to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Ohio High School Athletic Association's 2012 Division I state football champions, the Moeller Crusaders. Last Saturday, the Crusaders, led by head coach John Rodenberg, defeated Toledo Whitmer 20-12 to capture Moeller High School's 8th state championship title. Archbishop Moeller High School, a Catholic institution in the Marianist tradition, has currently a student enrollment of 925 outstanding young men. Since its inception in 1960, Moeller has earned itself a well-deserved reputation for promoting both academic excellence and athletic prowess. Under their very first coach, Jerry Faust, who later went on to coach for Notre Dame, the Crusaders compiled a record of 178 wins, 23 losses, and 2 ties, while winning 4 national football champions, 5 state football championships, and enjoying 7 undefeated seasons. One of Coach Faust's most favorite players was our very own John Boehner. Speaker Boehner, who played as a linebacker for the Crusaders. Following Coach Faust's tenure at the helm, the Crusaders have won 3 additional state championships, including the one last weekend in front of a crowd of 8,834 people at Fawcett Stadium in Canton, Ohio. So, to the Moeller High School football players, coaching staff, parents, student bodies, school administrators, teachers, faculty members, and fans, I offer you my heartfelt congratulations on this auspicious occasion of winning your 8th state championship. God bless you. God bless the Moeller Crusaders. God bless the men of Moeller. Take care. Go Crusaders.
For what purpose does the gentleman from North Carolina seek recognition?
Unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute and to revise and extend.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize an important day in American history. Tomorrow we will celebrate the 147th anniversary of the abolition of that regrettable institution of slavery. On 6 December 1865, the state of Georgia became the 27th state to ratify the 13th Amendment, marking the 3/4 supermajority necessary to amend the Constitution. The 13th Amendment accomplished something that the Emancipation Proclamation did not and perhaps could not do. It declared the non-existence of slavery in the whole of the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. The triumph the 13th Amendment represents not just the 13th Amendment represents not just for African Americans but for all Americans should be celebrated every December 6th. I invite my colleagues to read a very insightful article authored by Judge James A. Wynn, Jr. of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and I ask unanimous consent that a copy of his article be included in the congressional record. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Address the House for 1 minute and revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, no Republican in Congress is trying to protect millionaires or billionaires. In fact, Republicans lose most of the wealthiest counties and neighborhoods by very large margins. Much of the impasse in the current negotiations is over who is going to spend the money. Republicans do not want higher taxes simply because so much of what the federal government spends is lost to waste, fraud, and abuse. The most wasteful, inefficient way to spend money is to turn it over to the federal government. The best way to create jobs and hold prices steady is to let private citizens spend and invest as they choose. The wealthy do all right even in socialist countries, but lower income and working people come out much better in countries that allow the most free enterprise. Millionaires and billionaires can take care of themselves. Republicans are simply trying to help create jobs and keep the cost of living from going out of sight for ordinary people. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman's time has expired. For what purpose does the gentleman from Rhode Island seek recognition? Without objection, the gentleman from Rhode Island is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, Democrats and Republicans agree that we should preserve tax cuts for all Americans on the first $250,000 of family income. This will protect 98% of Americans from a tax increase and 97% of small businesses. We have different ideas on the best and fairest way to set rates for the top 2%, the wealthiest Americans. Let's have that debate in the coming weeks, but let's act on the overwhelming areas of agreement today. This is not about a Democratic or Republican victory in this chamber. It's about a victory for the American people. Instead of moving forward with middle-class tax cuts, our friends on the other side of the aisle are trying again to put forth a plan that gives tax breaks to the richest Americans at the expense of our seniors, veterans, the disabled, and the middle class. It's time for the partisan games to end, and let's prove to the American people that this is the people's house. Pass the middle-class tax cuts today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Massachusetts seek recognition? Does the gentlelady ask unanimous consent?
I ask unanimous consent.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday I was proud to join my colleagues in signing a petition to bring the middle-class tax cuts to the House floor for an up or down vote. While there is much left to negotiate, there is one step that we can take today. It will provide millions of families and 97% of all small businesses with the security of knowing that their income taxes will not rise on January 1st. Both parties and the American people agree on the need to pass an extension of the tax cuts for every family on the first $250,000 of income. The Senate has passed such a bill. The President stands ready to sign it today, and I have heard from hundreds of constituents urging support for this now. I urge my Republican colleagues to join us today in protecting middle-class Americans and send the Senate-passed bill to the President. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to address the House for up to 1 minute, revise and extend.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, the holidays are a time to reflect on the things for which we're grateful. As we enjoy the company of family and friends, we should also take time to thank the brave men and women serving in our armed forces. Every one of us knows the tremendous debt we owe our military families. This year, as a token of my thanks, I'm donating over 79,000 frequent flyer miles that I received for congressional travel to the Fisher House's Heroes Miles program, which provides free airline tickets to American soldiers and their families. Flying to Washington is part of our job, and there's no better way to use the miles we accumulate from those trips than to help our troops and their families see each other. I encourage all of my colleagues to donate their miles to the Fisher House or a similar charity that helps make a difference this holiday season. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote incurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Recorded votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and adopt House Resolution 825.
The clerk will report the title of the resolution.
House Resolution 825, resolution providing for the concurrence by the House in the Senate amendments to H.R. 2838 with an amendment.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lobiando, and the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Larson, each will control 20 minutes. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on House Resolution 825.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield to the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Mica, such time as he may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Well, thank you so much for yielding. And first, I want to take a moment to thank Mr. Lobiando for his outstanding leadership of the Coast Guard Committee. Also, Mr. Larson, the ranking member from Washington. I know Frank Lobiando has a great love for the United States Coast Guard. He has worked diligently, long and tirelessly for one of our most important branches and most historic branches of government over the years, and dedicated part of his time, but a full commitment to the United States Coast Guard. As we take up H.R. 2838 today, as we consider that reauthorization for the United States Coast Guard, and Congress must authorize every program we create the Coast Guard by law. They must also set the policy and the programs and the funding levels through our committee, an important responsibility. Now, we have an important responsibility, but we're reminded again, even in the last few days, the death of one of our Coast Guard officers, Chief Mate Terrell Horn. He was killed protecting the United States. I think it was drug smugglers who took his life, Southern California, while a small boat was trying to stop their activities. And here again, we're painfully reminded of the sacrifices of those men and women in service to the United States. This morning, I really would like to dedicate this reauthorization to his memory, the memory of all the men and women who served in the Coast Guard. I had lost one young lady from St. Augustine in the Arctic, and remember that tragic loss of her life and so many others who have served us well in the United States Coast Guard, an important national security and safety agency that protects us day in and day out, 24/7. So we are reminded of their sacrifices and today of our responsibility. To succeed at the many jobs that we assign members of the Coast Guard, they must have the resources to, on the water and the docks, to complete their important mission. This bill authorizes the Coast Guard for fiscal years 2013 and 14. It's a total of $8.6 billion. Of course, when we talk about trillions in our federal budget and activities, it's a small amount for the more than 50,000 Coast Guard men and women and for the programs that they undertake again each day. One of the things we've tried to do is make the regulatory burden on fishermen more reasonable by extending some of the time they undergo to have dockside examinations. We serve, in addition to, again, national security purposes and maritime safety, we also serve an important economic activity, and that's the fishing community. So this bill also looks towards helping others that we're responsible for in the maritime industry. One of the problems we've had is developing a TWIC card. A TWIC card is a Transportation Worker Identification Card. And we've had great problems with that, trying to get that installed so we can find out who is entering our ports, and that's done safely and securely, particularly with the threats that we face, the huge coastline, the ports, the exposure that we face from maritime threats. And we've, I think, hopefully lessened some of the burdensome time required by multiple trips to get folks that need these cards to go to these enrollment centers. So, again, trying to help those who we're supposed to serve and help them do their job in an expedited fashion. We also published, as you know, our committee published a report actually when we were in the minority, helped author it. The title of the report was "The Federal Government Must Stop Sitting on Its Assets." And in each of the categories and areas we're responsible for in the Transportation Committee, whether it's empty public buildings that have sat there, properties underutilized, we want to make certain that taxpayers' resources are used in the best possible way. So this bill follows up our report by requiring the Coast Guard that has currently sidelined some of one of our heavy icebreakers to make a decision on either being reactivated or decommissioned. Again, we can't sit on valuable assets in any of our agencies. Finally, this bill restricts the use of post-construction of future national security cutters until our national security cutters meet long-promised mission performance capabilities. We started producing a small number of national security cutters, bigger than our 100-plus foot cutters. After 9/11, we've had some problems with that program. It's our responsibility to straighten out those problems, make certain that the long-promised mission and performance capabilities are met, and this bill hopefully leads us in that positive direction. Unfortunately, the bill does not restrict the ability of foreign seamen injured outside the United States on non-U.S. flag vessels from suing in United States courts paid by United States taxpayers. It was something we hoped to achieve. We couldn't put it in this bill. There's some other measures I would have liked to have had in this bill. It does not, unfortunately, establish what we passed in the House, a uniform national standard for ballast water discharges, and that provision is supported by many in the House and by the U.S. and international maritime industry. So we've done a good part of the job. I think we've met our responsibility, and I am pleased that we are here to authorize for a period of 2 years the United States Coast Guard, its operations and its programs, and support the men and women who support us. So with that, I urge the passage of H.R. 2838, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
I rise in support of the resolution introduced by my colleague from New Jersey and chairman of the subcommittee, Mr. Lobiondo. Before I begin my remarks, I want to join Mr. Mica, and of course I'm sure many others, in offering my condolences to the entire Coast Guard family for the tragic loss of one of their shipmates during a drug interdiction operation in the waters off of Southern California this past weekend. We all recognize that the servicemen and women of the Coast Guard willingly and routinely expose themselves to highly dangerous conditions on behalf of our nation. Nevertheless, it's a profound tragedy when a service member makes that sacrifice, and our thoughts and prayers are with the Coast Guard at this time. The legislation I stand in support of today has been developed as a compromise over the last 2 months with negotiations with the Senate. It amends H.R. 2838, the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Act of 2012, and passed the House last November, and incorporates numerous provisions from those amendments to H.R. 2838 that cleared the Senate in September. And I appreciate Mr. Lobiondo's willingness to work with me on this legislation to have a bipartisan and open manner. I'm confident in saying that this bill embodies a fair and bipartisan compromise for everyone involved, and that we can feel proud of its work. As a ranking member of the Coast Guard Committee, it's been a high priority for me to advance certain things to revitalize and expand our domestic maritime industries. And this legislation marks a significant achievement in doing just that. It creates jobs that are vital in the shipbuilding industry by taking steps towards improving our icebreaker fleet and finishing the program of record for response boat medium. Earlier this year, I had a chance to visit job-creating shipyards that will be part of this modernization effort of the Coast Guard. These shipyards provide good-paying jobs for hard-working engineers, welders, electricians, mechanics, all over the Northwest and throughout the country. The reauthorization of the Maritime Administration will improve the fortunes of those shipyards, and I'm pleased that that is included in this bill as well. But we've also, in authorizing the Coast Guard, reformed a number of key programs. The Coast Guard is one of the most expansive missions in the federal government. This multi-mission maritime military service is responsible for a broad range of activities including mariner licensing, emergency oil response, vessel inspections, and navigation safety. The Coast Guard remains indispensable in the maintenance of a reliable and secure marine supply chain that supports maritime cargo operations, which contribute $649 billion annually to the U.S. GDP, sustaining more than 13 million jobs. This legislation authorizes funding levels for both the Coast Guard and the Reserve that provide for increased funding levels in fiscal years 13 and 14 over the fiscal year 12 level. And I believe that these funding levels in the bill do remain insufficient to address the documented needs of the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard has been asked to do more with less, and I'm afraid that their only choice in this time of budget uncertainty is to do less with less, and that's just wrong. So while I prefer these levels to be higher, I understand these funding levels are likely the best that can be provided under the constraints. We must be aware, however, that funding levels in this legislation are absent any consideration of what will be needed to address the estimated $260 million in damages to Coast Guard facilities in the Northeast as a result of Hurricane Sandy. These costs will be addressed in the future, I assume. And I want to highlight as well that this legislation contains several provisions that will improve Coast Guard's readiness and capabilities in the increasingly important Arctic region. Specifically, this bill directs the Coast Guard to complete a business case analysis to assess the cost-effectiveness of reactivating its heavy icebreaker, the Polar Sea. This analysis is overdue, and it is vitally important. At present, the Coast Guard has only one icebreaker, the Healy. And although the Coast Guard expects in 2013 to reactivate the other heavy icebreaker, the Star, the plain fact remains the Coast Guard's icebreaker fleet remains severely undercapitalized and overextended. As it will be years before a new icebreaker can be delivered, it's essential that we make informed decisions on the Polar Sea now in order to have a balanced assessment of Coast Guard polar icebreaker capabilities in the near term. This legislation also advances provisions that address many administrative, personnel, procurement, and regulatory issues affecting the Coast Guard, specifically new authorities that bring the Coast Guard into parity with other armed services. These authorities have been included. Additionally, this legislation contains new authorities to improve efficiency and oversight of the Coast Guard's major acquisition programs, especially new advanced procurement authority and development of multi-year capital investment programs. The bill includes language I authored that requires the Coast Guard to complete the procurement of 180 response boat mediums, or RBMs, as originally planned in the program of record for this vessel. This is a critical piece of maritime security, and the completion of these boats will lead to additional job creation in small shipyards. Besides addressing the needs of the Coast Guard, the legislation advances several important initiatives to support the U.S. Merchant Marine. Title III of the legislation protects the Jones Act by strengthening review and the notice requirements of future administrative waivers. It calls for, the provision originally called for in H.R. 3202, the American Mariner Jobs Protection Act, should help preserve more opportunities for U.S. carriers and seafarers. The title also provides for formal authorization for the Committee on Maritime Transportation System. And Title IV of the legislation includes several provisions that improve the Maritime Administration's ability to accept, manage, and recycle vessels held in the National Defense Reserve Fleet. I'm also pleased that Title VI reauthorizes the Marine Debris Research Reduction and Prevention Act. More and more marine debris from the 2011 Japanese tsunami continues to wash up on the shores of the Pacific coast, including my state of Washington. Japan, in the midst of recovery from this disaster, though, has shown extraordinary leadership and friendship with the United States by recently announcing that they will donate directly $5 million to debris cleanup. It's important that we reauthorize the Marine Debris Act to ensure that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has the authority it needs to work with states to address this threat. So I very much appreciate the cooperation of Chairman Lobiando for including this important environmental measure, and also applaud my colleague, Mr. Thompson, for his work to see this program reauthorized, and Mr. Farr. In closing, Mr. Speaker, this legislation reflects a fair and balanced compromise. We have an obligation to support the Coast Guard and to support our U.S. Merchant Marine. To have a safe and secure maritime environment is good for job creation, good for the economy, and good for the American people. In my estimation, this legislation fulfills that obligation. I urge its passage today, and just briefly want to thank once again Mr. Lobiando for his incredible work to be bipartisan, open, transparent, working to bring this legislation to passage. With that, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I rise in strong support of House Resolution 825. 825 reauthorizes the activities of the Coast Guard through the fiscal year 2014 at levels that will allow for the administration's requested 1.7% military pay increase for fiscal year 2013 and provide for military pay increase for fiscal year 2014 at a level consistent with CBO's estimate on the rate of inflation. The bill provides funding for the Coast Guard at levels that will reverse the irresponsible cuts proposed by the Obama administration and will ensure the service has what it needs to successfully conduct its missions. The legislation includes critical provisions that will give the Coast Guard and its service members and its dependents greater parity with their counterparts in the Department of Defense, something that we've worked very hard to achieve. H.R. 2838 also contains reforms and improvements to the Coast Guard's acquisition program and activities. The bill encourages job growth in the maritime sector by cutting EPA, TSA, and Coast Guard regulatory burdens on small businesses. Finally, the bill enhances the security of U.S. vessels and crews transiting high-risk waters, reauthorizes the national security aspects of the Maritime Administration for fiscal year 2013, and makes several important improvements to NOAA's marine debris program, as noted by Mr. Larson. H.R. 2838 was put together in cooperation with the minority and with our counterparts in the Senate. I'd like to thank Mr. Mica, Chairman of the Full Committee. I'd like to thank Mr. Rahol, the Ranking Member of the Full Committee. But I especially want to thank Mr. Larson. We've had, I think, a model for how a committee or a subcommittee should operate. We've been focused on results. We've been focused on incorporating good ideas. Rick, I very much appreciated your cooperation in moving forward on these very important issues for the nation. Finally, I'd like to thank the staff on both sides for their work and their help in this legislation. We rely on them a great deal. They've worked in an extraordinary manner, and it's very much appreciated, and hopefully we get the results we need. I also want to take a moment to underscore the very dangerous work that the Coast Guard does to keep our nation and our shores safe. We were all shocked and very saddened to hear the news this weekend that a coastie lost his life in the line of duty. This underscores how our Coast Guard men and women put their life at risk each and every day. They're really under-recognized and underappreciated for the work they do, and with drugs being such a great scourge in our country, it sounds like this coastie was just brutally murdered. So our heart goes out to the men and women of the Coast Guard, his colleagues, his family, his friends. Chief Petty Officer Terrell Horn was serving his country, gave his life for his country. And again, our thoughts and prayers go out to his family and friends. We are tremendously thankful for all the brave men and women of the Coast Guard and the work that they do each and every day. I urge all members to support 2838, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Hahn.
Gentlelady from California is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Larson. Thank you, Mr. Lobiando, for your work on this, and I rise to offer my support for the House-Senate agreement on the Coast Guard reauthorization for fiscal year 2013 and 2014. The United States Coast Guard plays an integral role to our nation's homeland security. They are on the front lines each and every day, ensuring that our ports and waterways remain safe and secure. As a co-founder and co-chair of the Congressional Bipartisan Ports Caucus, We're learning more and more every day about the critical role that our Coast Guard plays in the security of our ports. Our caucus members had a very productive conversation with Vice Admiral Peter Neffinger of the U.S. Coast Guard in April, whom I got to know very well in Los Angeles when he was the captain of the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And he discussed the Coast Guard's critical role in providing security and disaster preparedness at our nation's ports. That's why providing the Coast Guard with the necessary ships and gear they need is so important. However, it's neither the ships nor the gear that makes up the heart of the United States Coast Guard. It is the men and women who fight every day to make this country a safer place. They serve with bravery and poise and are sometimes called upon to make the ultimate sacrifice. And as has been talked about this morning, unfortunately that is what occurred this past weekend when a brave Coast Guardman gave his life for this country. On December 2nd, Chief Petty Officer Horn was killed when he and his team came upon a boat suspected of drug smuggling and were rammed upon approaching it. The impact knocked Officer Horn and another Coast Guardsman into the water, inflicting Horn with a severe traumatic head injury that ultimately proved to be fatal. Chief Petty Officer Terrell Horn was a distinguished Coast Guardman, and his life is deeply cherished by our nation as we reflect on his unwavering commitment to protecting our country. He and his family were from Redondo Beach, which is in my current congressional district, and his sacrifice serves as a stark reminder of the extraordinary sacrifices our men and women in uniform make boldly for this country each and every day. As my colleagues consider this bill before us, I ask that we all keep Officer Horn's family, friends, and fellow officers in the Coast Guard in your thoughts and prayers, and never forget the sacrifices that our men and women make for each and every day. I appreciate all the comments that have been made this morning reflecting this same thought. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Gentlelady from Oregon is recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, Ranking Member, Chair. I rise today in support of the underlying bill which reauthorizes important programs to keep our waterways safe and navigable, protect our marine economy, defend our maritime borders, and support the brave Coast Guard personnel, including the personnel of the U.S. Coast Guard Sector Columbia River, which is headquartered in Oregon's 1st Congressional District. They all work in pursuit of these vital missions, and I thank the Chairman and Ranking Member of the Coast Guard Subcommittee for their work on this, as well as the Chair and Ranking Member of the Full Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. In addition to supporting the basic mission of the Coast Guard, this legislation includes language to reauthorize another important mission carried out by our federal government that's worthy of this body's support, NOAA's Marine Debris Program. In June of this year, coastal residents in my home state of Oregon found a 66-foot dock resting on a beach near the town of Newport, Oregon. The dock was just one piece of many that scientists have estimated to be a debris field with as much as 1.5 million tons of debris that were washed into the ocean by the tsunami that struck Japan in March of 2011. Beyond the obvious navigational dangers posed by the dock and the other debris that have been discovered in states with Pacific coastline, the debris also brings with it invasive species that could harm our maritime environment. Not only is this debris dangerous, it's costly to remove, and the threat of a significant increase in debris arriving on our coasts has caused many state and local governments serious budgetary concerns. Oregon spent more than $80,000 just removing that one dock. Since the arrival of the Japanese dock on Agate Beach, Oregon, other members and I have heard from constituents who call on us to provide them with some assistance in dealing with this unprecedented situation. The Marine Debris Program at NOAA makes some funding available through grants provided to coastal communities and state and local governments. Thank you.
Gentleman is recognized for 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. The bill we're considering today reauthorizes NOAA's marine debris program. That's very important. In addition to that, I've introduced bipartisan legislation with Congresswoman Herrera Butler from Washington, the Marine Debris Emergency Act, to expedite that funding, which can currently take about a year from proposal to award. This bill will shorten the window to 60 days. That could be very important. So I urge my colleagues to support our coastal communities by supporting this legislation and the bill before us today. Thank you to the chairs and ranking member for your hard work, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. The gentleman from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Farr.
Gentleman from California is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for yielding. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to highlight Title VI of the Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation Act of 2012, which amends the Marine Debris Program. This partnership between NOAA and the United States Coast Guard has been hugely beneficial to our nation's coastal communities. It has improved research and debris removal activities at sea and built greater understanding of the challenges we face in addressing this threat. There are so many successful projects funded by the Marine Debris Program, which is just an astounding considering that its program spends far less than $10 million. I want to highlight the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation NOAA grant program for marine debris research and technology. From the 2005 to 2011, this program supported 46 projects involving fishermen, ports, marinas, and they leveraged $2.7 million in NOAA funding with $2.9 million in non-federal matching funds. Another program, Fishing for Energy, is one of an innovative program that installs collection bins for commercial fishermen to dispose of old and unwanted fishing gear. To date, this program has disposed of more than 700 tons of obsolete derelict gear, which annually that accounts for $250 million of lost marketable lobster and saves up to $792 million in damages to boat propellers from derelict fishing gear. And if that isn't enough, the Energy from Waste facility recycles the gear and harnesses electricity from the recycling process. It doesn't cost the fishermen anything to dispose of this gear, and that's why it's such a successful program. This is small federal investment results in huge cost savings. Marine debris is much larger and a growing problem. With disasters in Japan last year and the recent storms like Sandy, cleaning up debris requires both resources and coordination between agencies and states. While I commend the bipartisan support and leadership of my colleagues to get this bill to the President, I'm disappointed that the program's authorization has not been extended. I will continue to work for permanent reauthorization of the Marine Debris Program because it is critical for program development in coastal communities. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, which has bipartisan, bicameral compromise. I thank Chairman Mica, Chairman Hastings, and Ranking Member Rahal, Ranking Member Markey for their leadership in bringing my bill, H. 1171, to the floor for passage out of the House, and Chairman Lobiando and Ranking Member Larson for including this important language in this Coast Guard and Marine Transportation Act of 2012. I urge your support. Thank you very much.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey.
Continue to reserve.
Gentleman from New Jersey reserves. Gentleman from Washington.
Mr. Speaker, thank you so much for an opportunity to speak on this important resolution and want to urge everyone to support its passage. And finally, I do want to as well thank the staff for their great work in putting this together. It's a bit of a dance to put all the pieces together in a piece of legislation like this, but they did a great job. I want to extend my thanks to them as well. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New Jersey.
Once again, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank everyone who's been involved in this process, and again, especially thank Mr. Larson for the cooperative initiatives and efforts that we've been able to undertake. We hope that all the members of the House of Representatives will think about the sacrifices that the men and women of the Coast Guard make and vote affirmatively for this bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and agree to House Resolution 825? Those in favor will signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended, the resolution is agreed to, and without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table.
Hey, Rick, yeah. Thank you.
For what purpose does the gentlewoman from Tennessee seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass Senate Concurrent Resolution 50, expressing the sense of Congress regarding actions to preserve and advance the multi-stakeholder governance model under which the Internet has thrived.
The clerk will report the title of the concurrent resolution.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 50, concurrent resolution expressing the sense of Congress regarding actions to preserve and advance the multi-stakeholder governance model under which the Internet has thrived.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentlewoman from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, and the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Eshoo, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and insert extraneous material in the record for S-Con Res 50.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, representatives from 193 countries are meeting in Dubai to re-examine an international treaty dealing with telecommunications. Several hostile countries are seeking to use this opportunity to impose new international regulations on the Internet. We need to send a strong message to the world that the Internet has thrived under a decentralized, bottom-up, multi-stakeholder governance model. That is why I stand in strong support of Senator Rubio's Senate Concurrent Resolution 50. The U.S. is united in its opposition to international control over Internet governance. And we've seen leadership pushing back against ceding more power to the International Telecommunications Union. It's referred to as the ITU. It's a branch of the United Nations, and some want to give it new powers. Several countries see the Internet as a tool for political and/or economic control that they want to exploit. For example, Russia's Vladimir Putin has openly stated his intention to seek, and I'm quoting, international control over the Internet using the monitoring and supervisory capabilities of the ITU, end quote. And just last week, the Syrian government shut off Internet access as the regime sought to suppress the free exchange of information among its private citizens. But it's because the Internet is the ultimate tool of political and economic liberation that we should foster and protect it, not give those who fear its impact on politics and the economy the power to repress its continued innovation and untapped potential. I also want to make an important point about our legitimacy in the fight to keep the Internet thriving, democratic, and decentralized. Unfortunately, we did undermine our credibility when the Federal Communications Commission imposed net neutrality regulations without the proper statutory authority to do so. Even Ambassador Verveer at the State Department had made the point. He said in 2010 that the net neutrality proceeding, and I'm quoting him, is one that could be employed by regimes that don't agree with our perspectives about essentially avoiding regulation of the Internet and trying to be sure not to do anything to damage its dynamism and its organic development. It could be employed as a pretext or as an excuse for undertaking public policy activities that we would disagree with pretty profoundly," end quote. We need to pass S-Conres 50 and rebuild our credibility in support of Internet freedom. Regulating beyond our authority at home sets a very bad example when we want to oppose truly devastating regulations at the international level. Despite our domestic disagreements on telecom policy, one thing both sides of the aisle can agree on is that we should uphold the Internet governance model that's working. Let's not try to fix what's not broken. In Dubai, we want our country promoting private markets in U.S. interest. Let's encourage the decentralized governance model that's been successful in the past, and let's show leadership instead of giving away broad regulatory powers to those who don't deserve and who should not have it. Thank you, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentlelady reserves. Gentlelady from California.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself as much time as I may consume.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, it's fitting that on the week in which the World Conference on International Telecommunications convenes in Dubai, that the House will once again take up a resolution demonstrating the bipartisan commitment of Congress to preserve the open structure and multi-stakeholder approach that has guided the Internet over the past 2 decades. I think that we are all very, very proud that there is not only bipartisan but bicameral support underlying this resolution, and there is complete support across the executive branch of our government. In other words, the United States of America is totally unified around this on this issue of an open structure, a multi-stakeholder approach that has guided the Internet over the past 2 decades. The Senate resolution before us today, Mr. Speaker, makes a minor technical change to a resolution that the House passed unanimously in August by a vote of 414 to 0. I have no objection to this change, and I ask my colleagues to support this bipartisan measure, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentlelady from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, who is chairman of the Subcommittee on Telecommunications and the Internet.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized for 4 minutes.
I thank my colleague and friend for the time. I rise today in support of Senate Concurrent Resolution 50, which, as you've heard, opposes international regulation of the Internet. It's virtually identical to the language that our friend and colleague, Representative Mary Bono-Mack, put forward in H-Con Res 127, which was introduced last year or earlier this year and passed by my subcommittee and in the full Energy and Commerce Committee, and went on to pass this House without opposition. So with this vote, we unify that language, and we send a strong bipartisan, bicameral signal about America's commitment to an unregulated Internet. I want to thank Representative Bono-Mack for championing this important legislation to keep the Internet free from government regulation. I also wish to thank FCC Commissioner Robert McDowell, who has tirelessly sounded the call not only about the peril we face if we stand idly by as countries like Russia and China seek to extort control over the Internet, but also about how the FCC's own actions adopting network neutrality rules regulating the Internet undermine America's case abroad. I also fear that recent talks of cybersecurity executive orders here at home may be cited back to us by some foreign nations, with them accusing us of telling them to do as we say, but not as we do. Historical hands-off regulatory policy has allowed the Internet to become the greatest vehicle for global social and economic liberty since the printing press. And despite the current economic climate, it continues to grow at an astonishing pace. FCC Commissioner McDowell and Chairman Janikowski are in Dubai this week as U.S. delegates to the World Conference on International Telecommunications. Our committee has also sent representatives from both parties to keep an eye on the proceedings. There, the 193 member countries of the United Nations are gathered to consider whether to apply to the Internet a regulatory regime that the International Telecommunications Union created in the 1980s for old-fashioned telephone service, as well as whether to swallow the Internet's non-governmental organizational structure whole and make it part of the United Nations. Neither of these are acceptable outcomes and must be strongly opposed by our delegation. Among those supportive of such regulation is Russian President Vladimir Putin, who spoke positively about the idea of establishing international control over the Internet, to use his own words. Some countries have even proposed regulations that would allow them to read citizens' email in the name of security, require citizens to register their email addresses for tracking purposes, and to charge for Internet access to their countries on a per-click basis. This resolution rejects these proposals by taking the radical position that if the most revolutionary advance in technology, commerce, and social discourse of the last century is not broken, then, as you've heard others say, there's no reason to, quote-unquote, fix it. The ability of the Internet to grow at this staggering pace is due largely to the flexibility of the multi-stakeholder model that governs the Internet so successfully today. Non-governmental institutions now manage the Internet's core functions with input from private and public sector participants, and this structure prevents governmental or non-governmental actors from controlling the design of the network or the content that it carries. Without one entity in control, the Internet's become a driver of jobs, information, business expansion, investment, innovation. Moving away from the multi-stakeholder model would harm these abilities, preventing the Internet from spreading prosperity and the cause of freedom. As the United States delegation continues its work at the wicket, this resolution is an excellent bipartisan demonstration of our nation's commitment to preserve the multi-stakeholder governance model and keep the Internet free from international regulation. I yield back the balance of my time and encourage my colleagues to support passage of this measure.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I would like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman from Louisiana, Mr. Scalise, who is a member of the Telecommunications and Internet Subcommittee.
The gentleman from Louisiana is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the gentlelady from Tennessee for yielding and for her leadership on this issue. And as has been noted, right now in Dubai, an arm of the United Nations is considering trying to take international control over parts of the Internet. And if you look right now in a struggling economy that we have in the United States, one of the few bright spots is the telecommunications industry. And one of the reasons, as a computer science major, I would argue one of the reasons that the telecommunications and technology industry has been so successful, even in a tough economy, is because the government hasn't figured out how to regulate it and slow it down. And yet here you have a proposal by the United Nations, coming out of the United Nations, to interfere with that multi-stakeholder organization that's been and allowed this industry to be so successful and allowed the Internet to shape and dramatically improve so many people's lives. So many of the things that we can do today and all the conveniences that have been added through great new apps and great new technology have come from this multi-stakeholder governance of the Internet. And yet here you have the United Nations trying to step in. And let's be real clear about who some of these countries are that want to do this and what they're intending to do if they were to be successful. Countries like Russia and China are leading this. Some of the Arab nations right now where you see uprisings, many of those uprisings, by the way, have been brought through social media, through an open and free Internet where people can come together in cyberspace and hold their leadership accountable and in some cases rise up against oppressive governments. And those governments would like nothing more than to be able to shut that down by taking over control of the Internet. And I know it's been brought up before by the gentlelady from Tennessee and others, but I think it's important to note that Vladimir Putin, when he was meeting with the ITU Secretary General, said his goal, the reason that he and others like China are pursuing this, is to establish international control over the Internet through these new ITU rules. And so while these discussions are going on in Dubai, I think it's critical that this piece of legislation is something that we can arm our supporters with, those who stand up for Internet freedom, to say it's the United States Congress's bipartisan agreement that we want to maintain that freedom. We don't want United Nations control over the Internet, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have no further speakers, and as I close, I want to thank Ms. Eshoo for the leadership that she has given. She's the ranking member of the Telecommunications and Internet Subcommittee. I also want to draw attention to the outstanding work that Representative Mary Bono Mack did as she led the debate and the discussion and pushed for the resolution, authored the resolution that the House passed earlier on this very issue. I also want to thank her for her work with Senator Rubio in having a resolution that would be agreed to by both chambers. As Ms. Eshoo indicated earlier, the Senate resolution makes a technical change, a small technical change, in the resolution that was passed by the House. This is where the U.S. needs to stand firm. It's a way that we, in a bipartisan manner, can stand firm for freedom. I encourage the passage of this resolution, and I encourage that we as a body will continue to stand for a free and open Internet. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back.